This is a story about one of the most influential guitars in rock history, the Gibson SG Special from 1965, owned by none other than Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. A guitar that was responsible for creating an entirely new genre of guitar music, heavy metal. A guitar built from a thin plank of mahogany that was originally sold as one of the entry-level models in the mid-60s. It had the most humble single-coil P90 pickups, simple dot inlays, and a slightly questionable neck joint. And yet, this underrated piece of equipment became the tool of choice by one of the most creative and ambitious rock musicians in the late 60s, Tony Iommi. Now, there are other highly influential guitars like Jimmy Page's 1959 Gibson Les Paul, Brian May's Red Special, or Jimi Hendrix's White Strat that he used at Woodstock Festival. But in spite of this, the Gibson SG played by Tony Iommi came to define a whole music genre of its own. Black Sabbath's guitar that eventually came to be known as the Monkey SG, it wasn't just a one-off tool, it was an almost constant use between 1969 and 1975, both live and in the studio. If you know of another guitar that was used as exclusively by a band as this one, please let me know. This guitar was responsible for an incredible number of classics. Black Sabbath, The Wizard, NIB, Children of the Grave, Sweet Leave, Into the Void, Snowblind, Supernaut, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, Sabracadabra. Its many unique features, its sound characteristics, and why it works so well for Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath. We'll also be checking out how it was customized, done in a time when few people in England were able or willing to do so. Influenced by one of his favorite groups, The Shadows, and one of his main guitar idols, Hank Marvin, Tony's first main guitar with Black Sabbath was a 1960s Fender Stratocaster. In the very early days of the band, I was into playing a battered Fender Stratocaster. The Strat was the hot guitar in England at the time, so playing one was very much a status thing. I know that people like Jimi Hendrix had played one, and I think that made everyone think of them as being in. The Strat was a 60s pre-CBS model with sunburst finish and rosewood fretboard. Typical of the time, Tony had the guitar modified throughout the years, including refinishing the guitar's body in white with the help of his dad. Many guitarists in the mid-60s who wanted to play guitar couldn't yet afford or find a good guitar, like Brian May, Jeff Beck, or Tony Iommi, and went to work on either creating their own guitar or modifying another one. I love my white Fender Stratocaster because I'd worked on it so much. I had it in bits and I put it all back together again. I potted the pickups, filed the frets down on it, and basically did everything to try and make it easier for me to play on. But it wasn't Tony's only guitar. He had bought a Gibson SG in 1967. And although we can't be sure, it is believed that Tony originally found a right-handed Gibson SG Special, which he was able to swap, as he is left-handed, of course. And he happened to come across a right-handed guitarist who owned a lefty Gibson SG Special and made a happy deal. Quote Tony, "I bought my SG in a music store in Birmingham back in 1967. I was told it was a 64, but I've never verified that. Originally, it was my backup guitar. My primary guitar was a Fender Stratocaster." The Gibson SG was used by a number of guitarists influential to Tony, such as Pete Townshend of The Who, George Harrison of The Beatles, and Eric Clapton of The Cream, who used an SG standard that was painted in psychedelic colors by an art collective called The Fool. Recording the first album. So, funnily enough, the sound of hard rock was almost defined by a Fender Stratocaster. Tony was about to record the first Black Sabbath album with his customized white Stratocaster. He had just managed to record the song Wicked World when fate intervened. Quote Tony, "While I was recording the first track on our first album, the Strat's pickups blew. I couldn't find anyone who knew how to repair it, and we didn't have replacement parts in those days. So I just trashed it and started using the SG. It sounded so good I never looked back. It was my primary guitar on Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master of Reality." So, Tony went for a cherry red Gibson SG Special with two P90s. Let's take a closer look at Tony's guitar about 2 years after he got it. The earliest images we can find are those of Tony playing his SG at a Star Club in Hamburg on October 1st of 1969. Tony's guitar here looks pristine. It has a cherry-finished mahogany body and neck. 2 regular P90s in black covers, a regular nut, Cluson double-line strip tuners with white plastic tips, and from what we can tell, a single wraparound bridge, sometimes referred to as a lightning bolt bridge. No other tailpiece, nor the tailpiece holes that later appeared. Mid-60s SG Specials came equipped with a variety of bridges, typically with the wraparound bridge, but also with tremolo versions, the Vibrola and the Bixby. Tony's SG had tailpiece holes all the way at the back, leading me to wonder whether they were added later. It means he would have had 2 sets of tailpiece holes with the same 3.2 inches spacing, because he used a wraparound at the normal location around 1971. Unless a good photo is available of the back of the headstock, one can only guess about the serial number, but Tony told Lou Morris, better known as SG Lou, that it was identified by Gibson as a 1965. The neck was joined to the body at the 22nd fret, and a box joint was used, so called because the neck is basically a block of wood glued in a square cutout in the guitar. This gives unparalleled upper fret access, but the joint is really weak. This was later changed late 67, early 68 to the traditional and stronger mortise and tenon joint. One of the best known facts about Tony Iommi is, of course, that 2 fingertips of his fretting hand were severed due to an industrial accident which happened when he was around 16 years old in 1964. Quote Tony, "Actually, I had to use light strings. I had a work-related accident in the early 60s that cut off the tips of my fingers. As a result, I can't bend heavier strings. I can't even feel the strings. Suddenly, I had to develop a new way of playing. Ironically, I had the accident on the same day that I was supposed to quit my factory job to tour Germany with this group. So when I started playing again, I had to devise a new way. I used to play a lot with my forefinger and pinky because the 2 middle fingers were bandaged up. I learned to use and bend with my little finger a lot. I tried playing right-handed, but it was too difficult. I was too impatient to try playing the other way. I just couldn't get the hang of it. As you can imagine, I had to learn to play standard chords in very unorthodox ways. Then I created these plastic thimbles that extended the length of my fingers, which allowed me to play in a normal fashion." Just imagine having to stop playing guitar when this is the thing you want most. Imagine being told you will never play again and having to endure excruciating physical pain each time you pick up a guitar. But Tony is not like others. He does find a way, and with the help of his manager, he learned about Django Reinhardt, the famous jazz guitarist who only had the use of 2 fingers. Tony was highly inspired and slowly started practicing again. In order to do so, he needed an instrument that was customized for his needs. The Fender Stratocaster had already been customized around 1967 or 68, but the spare Gibson SG guitar was left stock until 1969, and it required a similar set of changes. In England, there was pretty much no one who was able to modify Tony's guitar, but after Tony had recorded the first album in November 1969, pretty much with the stock SG, he asked the help of John Birch, a local guitar and electronics designer, to help him customize the guitar. Here's what he needed: lower string pressure, to deal with his damaged fingertips on his fretting hand, to ensure his thimbles wouldn't get trapped while playing, and to ensure that he could bend the strings properly. He needed very low string pressure with low string action. He pioneered the use of thinner strings, and his choice was a mixed set of nickel guitar and banjo strings of 008s, with both the high E and B string being an 008. The frets on his guitar were filed down very low to allow the action to be lowered. In addition to that, he had the fretboard sprayed with a clear polyurethane protective finish, a very smooth fretboard which the poly coating helped with. And with the amount of gigs and hundreds of playing hours, the frets and fretboard typically wore out very fast. So spraying the neck in polyurethane ensured that the fretboard was less prone to wear. It can also be seen on early Stratocasters and on Brian May's Red Special. More sustain. So when you reduce the string tension and string action, there's a chance that you'll lose sustain along the way, especially when playing solos or bending strings. You may also lose some bottom end. To counter this a little bit, John Birch rewound the bridge pickup of his P90 and would have then gone from pickup with 7.5K or 8K to 10 or 12K. While it's not a massive difference, it does make this tone a lot fatter. On top of that, the bridge tone control was disconnected to get a bit more output and attack from the bridge pickup. Let's have a closer look at the pickups. They have stainless steel covers. The treble pickup has 6 guide screws, while the neck pickup has 9. John Birch allegedly created his own magnets and came up with his own wiring dimensions. Birch typically used oversized cobalt steel magnets and used thin wiring like AWG 4.4 or even 4.5, which is thinner, to get the most number of winds on the pickup possible to increase resistance. Although samarium cobalt magnets were discovered in 1966, I think it's unlikely they would have already made it to Tony's pickups in 1969, although they could have been used in the later John Birch Magnum pickups of the late 70s. Less feedback. The P90s are single coils, and Tony used a Dallas Rangemaster treble booster with a Laney Supergroove. To get any overdrive from that type of non-master volume amp, you need to crank it the old-fashioned way and set it to maximum volume. And there is no doubt that the combination of those single coils with the treble booster and power amp distortion results in uncontrollable feedback. So John got to work by encasing the pickups in plastic to ensure the coils would feedback less. Some say also the control cavity of the SG was covered in copper foil to reduce further noise. Although the pickup engraving reads Superflux by John Birch, when the pickup naming was still in its early stages, the neck pickup is said to be just a regular P90 version called Simplux. This was again a single coil pickup, but now potted in epoxy and had a stainless steel cover. Better tuning. With thinner strings and intense playing came a tuning challenge. The guitar was set to detune easily, which annoyed Tony. Having tuning issues with the wraparound bridge is what prompted Tony to have a stop tail piece installed and experimenting with various bridges, hoping it would help, but it didn't. There are a few other changes to improve the tuning, like adding a custom roller bridge similar to the ones on the Mosrites or Gretches in the 60s, and this can be seen in stills of the 1970 live show in Paris. Also, a 0 fret was added to ensure that the strings wouldn't get stuck in the nut, and to ensure the guitar strings were set a bit higher to avoid rattling over the low frets. This also ensured better intonation and getting the open strings to ring out like the fretted notes. Finally, the regular white tip tuners were changed for German-made Schallers. The tuning difficulties were one of the reasons why he would eventually retire it in 1975. Tony said, "It was hard to stay in tune, particularly with my Gibson, because the neck would shift." After its retirement in the late 70s, the stop tailpiece and bridge were removed to make way for a Leo Kwan badass bridge. Some other features of the Monkey SG. So the bevels. Obviously, the SGs of the time had beautiful contours, but sometimes the woodwork was outrageous. Tony's SG is an example where the bevels are just super deep. To this day, John Diggins replicates the contours of those original Monkey SG bevels on his own SG designs. According to John Diggins, the bevels on the body and pickguard were like that from the factory. Neither he nor John Birch did anything to change the body contours. Pickup size and surrounds. There's something very strange about the pickups on the Monkey SG. When John Birch removed the covers of the P90s, he was able to encase them in a smaller package and ended up with some unique pickup dimensions, which he later retained when he started building his high-powered Magnum humbuckers. From a distance, Tony's pickups could easily be mistaken for humbuckers with chrome covers. But on closer inspection, they don't quite have the size of humbuckers. They're less wide than P90s and larger than mini humbuckers. To top it off, they come with a completely custom-made set of pickup rings. The neck pickup ring surrounds the pickup, while the bridge ring gave them a distinctive look with the black surrounds. The pickguard. The small pickguard, covering only the lower part of the body, was altered to fit the JB pickup surrounds. The pickguard is unlike most SG pickguards of the day, with a very flat beveled angle and a distinctive squared-off corner at the lower horn. To accommodate for the new pickup rings, the pickguard was cut to size. Top strap pin. The front strap pin was moved from the back of the guitar to the upper horn, presumably to aid with stability so the neck doesn't lean forwards. Headstock. When Tony had the guitar adapted in 1969, it had a John Birch sticker and a custom truss rod cover. Those have since been removed, showing a bit of damaged lacquer. The monkey sticker. Until the now famous monkey sticker was applied, the guitar was left stock, although it did carry a few circle-shaped stickers in 1971. Around 1972, Tony was said to have bought a sticker of a monkey playing a violin in New York and put it on his guitar. Right-handed pots. It's a very small detail, but Tony's left-handed SG did not come equipped with left-handed volume and tone pots. Watch the part in Red Salad in Paris 1970 where Tony does his signature volume swells on the bridge volume knob, and notice how he runs it clockwise instead of counterclockwise, which would be more logical. Reverse taper pots are still not commonplace, and they sure weren't in the early 70s. The tone of the SG. So why does this guitar's tone work so well for Black Sabbath? Starting with the basics, the mahogany body and neck are great for sustain and have this low mid frequency to them that really brings a lot of body to the sound. The P90s are equally important because they are single coil designs that have a very wide frequency range and allow the player to get very heavy and spiky rhythm tone, or like Clapton, a very fluty and soft woman tone. What it absolutely has is dynamics, the ability to play very hard or very soft, with thousands of combinations in between. The low winds of the P90s deliver great string attack and clean up well when you use the volume knob. Lastly, the P90s work very well with the treble booster as they have more fatness than the Stratocaster pickups to boost the right frequencies, but are not that high output that they choke the sound. That became an issue once Tony started using the 24K high output John Birch Magnum humbuckers in his black custom SGs of the late 70s. But Tony wanted complete and utter sound domination, and of course he was the only guitarist to cover all the bases. In Tony's words, the big problem with being the only guitarist in the band is that you have to work very hard to keep the bottom from falling out. I tried all sorts of things, like I tried to create rhythm parts that would allow the E string to ring as much as possible. People would always tell me, you can't lower the pitch of your strings. That's not right. I actually used several different tunings. I would try anything. Occasionally I tried as much as 3 semitones down for Ozzy because he couldn't hit certain notes. We try anything to make our sound heavier. A quick recap of other guitars. On Paranoid, a large proportion of the songs including the songs Paranoid and Iron Man, were likely recorded with a white Gibson SG Custom, also customized by John Birch, with a modification to its bridge pickup. This guitar has 2 PAF humbuckers in the neck and middle positions, and a John Birch P90 in the bridge. Note that the guitar is an ebony fretboard and a Bigsby tremolo. While Tony was playing the white SG a lot on the Paranoid album and subsequent tour, it was apparently stolen and he went back to the Monkey SG. Tony did not mention that his Monkey SG guitar was the key guitar used on Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath or Sabotage. That is because several other guitars were used for those albums too. Although we know that the Monkey SG was probably used on a majority of the songs on these records, he also used a white Gibson SG Junior, which he received from Leslie West, a Gibson Barney Kessel, and a few other SGs. Live, though, the Monkey SG stayed in near constant use. Retirement and later changes. So why was the Monkey SG retired? So Tony, as we all know, was always looking for the next breakthrough, and he felt his sound, whilst amazing, was not allowing him to break into new territory and do something new for Sabbath. The press felt that Sabbath was struggling to innovate in the mid-70s, and Tony was in awe of some new bands like Boston, UFO, and others. He felt his old sound was too muffled and dark, and he was looking for more treble and sustain. At around 1975, he had completed the design of an entirely custom SG with John Birch and John Diggins, an assistant in the shop, who actually now builds all of Tony's custom guitars. The Monkey SG was used less and less as Tony favored a more aggressive sound and needed a guitar that stayed more in tune and was less prone to feedback from the wall of Laney's. After the Monkey SG was retired, a final few changes were made to it, such as installing badass wraparound bridge and adding the witch hat knobs. Hand over to Hard Rock Cafe. Tony originally said no, only to give Don a call after a few years and finally relinquished his guitar. This happened at Ozfest in 2004 in Tampa, Florida. but Tony did add the stipulation that he could always request it back should he want to. To his credit, he wanted people to see the guitar and not to be stuck in the box. You can still see the guitar at Hard Rock Cafe in New York today. Quote Don, "The greatest thing I ever got was Tony Iommi's monkey guitar. It's a red Gibson SG with a little decal of a monkey on it. That was on his first 3 Sabbath records, and that guitar basically started metal." So the Monkey SG has great significance. It was used on countless classic songs, played intensely on the road and in the studio for 7 years or more, and helped the birth of heavy metal. There are almost no pictures of Tony in the early 70s with another guitar. So the guitar was anonymous with the sound of Black Sabbath. As Tony himself said, it's the history of Black Sabbath.